come è successo. La domanda che mi pongo è se dal punto di vista narrativo quante libertà invece si è preso per rendere più action il film alla fine, cioè quanta libertà c'è nella storia.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, should we use don't use any of these? Just use this, okay. You know, as a filmmaker, working on a true story, you have two responsibilities. One is to make the best film you can, engage the audience, allow them to empathize with the characters, you know, permit them to feel everything that they should feel to be invested in the story. The second responsibility, equally important, is to adhere to the fundamental truth of the story itself as it happened in the movie. So, in the course of trying to maintain that balance, kept the facts, the central facts, exactly as they took place, but for example, I added a bit more tension in the third act so that the movie didn't sort of fall flat at the end, and you guys didn't all boo me when I came in here. And I also introduced a few other elements. Most of the storytelling sins are sins of omission, because you have it could have been a 10-hour miniseries with all the things that people did to support this mission. You know, I was forced to make choices about what to use and what not to use, so there are people who feel like, oh, you know, there's this whole wonderful part that's omitted from the movie. And that was hard because there was a lot of stuff. Yes, you're exactly right to point out that many of them come from television. That's a function of the fact that most of the good drama that's being done now, you know, in Los Angeles is on television. You know, adult drama has really shifted into cable channels. So you have Mad Men and Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones and The Killing and on and on and on. And it's much more difficult to make the economics work on making a drama theatrical release. So, you know, Damages, for example, is a place I drew a lot of actors from. But there was just, and obviously Breaking Bad and other places, not deliberately out of wanting to work from that genre, from that medium, but because that's where talented people were working. In terms of, you know, casting by visuals, I did have posters up in my office of all the real people and the way they looked. It didn't make that an exclusive consideration, but when an actor came in and did look just like the person, that was kind of thrilling. And strangely enough, I probably would have, you know, I would have cast him anyway. But John Goodman looks exactly like the guy that he played in the movie, so that always tickled me. It's true that I'm not a political expert or pundit, but I can tell you from my research and observation that the hostage crisis did irreparable damage to the Carter administration. Although Ronald Reagan turned out to be a much stronger politician than anyone in the Carter administration imagined, they had sort of dismissed him as an airhead and a dilettante and an actor, you can imagine. And then, you know, he turned out to be quite potent as a politician. So maybe he would have won anyway, but that didn't, this didn't help him at all. I wanted to make a movie that wasn't political per se, that didn't instruct the audience that they ought to feel one way or another. I wanted to make a movie that couldn't be exploited for people who had, you know, one or another takes, for example, on the situation in Iran. I wanted to make a movie that was expressly about a story that happened some 30 years ago. And I used the Carter voiceover at the end because the story was so outlandish. I really wanted to cement in the audience's mind as they're walking out of the theater, this really took place. What you just saw is a real story. I didn't want to make it a referendum on the Carter presidency. Although I think, one of the other reasons why I use what he said is I think it's rather elegant. It points to a central theme in the movie, which is about resolving problems peacefully and with integrity. I don't know, the cinema, I think the goal of the cinema is not necessarily to save people, it's to me, it's an art form, and people express themselves, hopefully artfully, through this medium, and I think that can do a lot of things that are unexpected, move people, great art is transformative, rare, but it's very special. I think, in terms of this movie, My hopes for it were frankly just to sort of pay tribute to the people who make sacrifices for their country by leaving behind their family and that sort of thing. And on a deeper level is to push folks toward an examination of some of the underlying issues, questions raised without being didactic and telling people what they should think. I love cinema in the sense that, it started with a screenplay that I read and I was moved by and astonished by, and that I wanted to get involved with just purely as an artist, as a director and as an actor and so on. However, I also love my country, and I in a very pragmatic way, I'm not a jingoist, but I do recognize that there are a lot of sacrifices people make and people who work very hard, and I respected that, and I wanted to pay homage to those people, probably in the broadest possible sense. Renoir is one of my favorite filmmakers, and many of the themes present in his movies are about the fundamental decency and interconnectedness in some ways of mankind. And that's a theme that I always try to keep present, which naturally includes a kind of love for country, but also transcends it in a way because it reaches beyond national borders. And in terms of the political issue, I anticipated some things, I didn't anticipate others. It's always funny because you release a movie quite a bit later than the genesis of when you start thinking about it. So several years ago, when I started thinking about making the movie, I imagined that there would be some similarities that people would draw, for example, between the revolution in the Arab world, the unintended consequences of supporting pro-Western dictators and sort of turning a blind eye to corruption or oppression or that sort of thing, because that's what was happening at the time in Mubarak in Egypt and elsewhere, and they were dealing with, everyone was dealing with the consequences of the ensuing, kind of quasi-revolution there. And I knew that, obviously the Green Revolution, loomed over this. The Green Revolution, the kind of interesting irony of it was that they co-opted a lot of the features of the Islamic revolution to make it a sort of more politically palatable revolution. But it was in fact a revolution against Khamenei's regime and Ahmadinejad and that election, in particular the presidential election, which is huge to be fraud. I think that I was very surprised. I wasn't surprised, but I was sad and moved by the tragedy in Benghazi and by what happened in Cairo, and that was not something that I could anticipate. But it did make me glad that one of the features of the movie was about paying tribute to the very kinds of people who lost their lives there, and that it was saddening because it sort of to see history repeat itself so plainly from the research footage that I looked at from 30 years ago to what's on the television screens today. It was quite saddening, and it asks, have we not come very far at all? Have we not figured out the answers to some of these problems, And I don't have the answers to those questions, but it definitely raised them in my mind when that stuff was happening.